Alright, so here we are, landed on the moon. We've just finished filling up our cathene tank as well as our liquid fuel and our oxidizer. Found a halfway decent area to land on. As you can see here, I did get a nice, about really close to 50 kilometer circularized equatorial orbit. Did a scan. Found that I'm really glad I didn't try to land here as originally I did, because this square was not unveiled to me yet, and it would probably be right about where I tried to land, so I'm glad that I got another scan in, because I would have landed empty and had to abort the miner, because I don't think it has enough fuel after a landing to get back up, depending on how high I land from. Now, this time I landed from 50 kilometers, had plenty of fuel and oxidizer left, so we're going to go ahead and pull our panels back up, and I'll go ahead and keep the fuel and oxidizer converters open just for now. This time we shouldn't have that big of a deal launching to the target. So I'm starting to get back into the swing of, man, I really have. I've spent 2 months doing pretty much nothing but engineering, a little bit of hyper editing to cheaty test in simulation some of the modules, but I have not flown missions in Kerbal for a couple of months now, other than orbits, lots of orbits and deorbiting, and that's about it. So this should be a lot more interesting now that I'm kind of getting the hang of actually running the rest of the portions of the game. Got a nice orbital inclination going here. Now, I'm not sure how well the rendezvous guidance works. The last time my orbits were way off, so it wasn't going to rendezvous anyway. But I haven't tried to do a rendezvous from kind of a moon. And I have a message. So, one of these days, I'll actually get a little bit better. Oh, disengage. I forgot. I'm going into a 50. Ugh. So, yep, it's going to take a little bit for me to, yep, a little bit off. That's okay. It's good to be in a little bit of a different orbit so that I can transfer back down. So, that's alright. But, we are up. We still have a ton of kethane this time. I actually did end up getting a small amount of kethane into the engine probe, as it's called over there. If I were really awesome and could wield the powers of Scott Manley, I could probably solo fly this guy into more appropriate orbit and catch up. But I'm just gonna go ahead and let it get off into the distance and do a different do a normal poor man's rendezvous, if you will. I could not afford space flight lessons. So, yep, I just wanted to give that quick update. I suppose we're on episode 3 now, which is awesome. And we'll go ahead and see. I'm not sure, but I think I might actually be able to top this guy off, and then we'll have to make some real decisions about what we decide to do next. How we're going to get the other engine over here, how we're going to get the... I might just launch the Caladrius next and bring the Caladrius to the moon. That could be an interesting test of the engines, and then fuel it up from there. We'll have to see. Alright, as you can see, we lost a pretty significant amount of cathane from a failure on my first attempt to get an appropriate rendezvous set up. So I did have to change my orbit a second time. And now we are moving into dock. We're going to see if we can fill up this engine tank with just the cathane that we have. If we can, I will probably actually go ahead and do one more landing to fill her up, and then decide whether or not we're going to bring... I mean, I guess we have to bring this whole section back to Kerbin, and hopefully get a... I'd probably go ahead and do another a launch window, maybe even in this episode. So we'll go ahead and try to get him docked in there. Yes. Push her up just a little faster. See the converter expanding to make sure that I am full of monopropellant, which is wonderful. Come on, we are wiggling, and we're docked. Alright, now we can go ahead, shut down the RCS, and see what happens when we use up all this cathane. See how far... No, we're not going to get it filled up this time. I'm just kidding. But 7,000 cathane gets us... well, almost there. So actually probably just go ahead and fill her up one more time, and then we'll start our burn back to Kerbin and see what we can get done there. So here we are preparing for our return flight from Kerbin. The engine is now full of fuel, and I have 6,000, almost 7,000 kethane in the mining platform. We're going to burn back, get into about a 500 kilometer orbit-ish, and then I'll be trying to figure out what to do from there as far as how to make the best light out of the situation that I'm in. Oh, nope. That's not going to get me anywhere. There we go. So, I'm probably going to make it back to Kerbin with almost no kethane left. You know what? I'm actually just going to go ahead and stop converting. Shut everything down. I'll just stop using kethane. There we go. That'll put an end to that. And we'll see how much fuel we end up with, and how much kethane. Of course, we're not going to have any less kethane than we have now, but we'll see how much fuel we end up with once we get back there. Okay, so here we are back. We're looking at the Big Gulp in a oblong, ridiculously high orbit as I try to figure out what I'm going to do next and how I'm going to go about doing it. I've got a couple of eccentric orbits to take care of. I've got to refuel. Just about everything that's out here needs fuel of some sort, and get it all set up and ready to go before my next launch. Or, alternatively, I think I may actually just go ahead and launch the Caladrius and see what happens when both engines get docked to it, and see if it has enough delta V to get to the moon and do some fueling there. In either case, I believe I'm going to switch to, for everyone's sake, a post-commentary version of the Duna base Calamity mission architecture challenge, because one, doing live recording and trying not to screw everything up is a little bit nerve-wracking, and I'm actually trying to accomplish the challenge portion of this, and two, because in post-commentary you won't have nearly as many cuts back and forth as I try to trim down the video size as I did in the last video, and it'll allow me to record at my leisure. And okay, yeah, that alarm needed to be deleted a while ago. Anyway, it'll let me record at my leisure and then just go back and do the audio later, which I'm more than okay with. Allows me a little bit more room to get everything done, and I don't have to worry about dogs running around or girlfriends wanting to watch TV, things like that. Anywho, so the rest of this episode will be done in a post-commentary format, and I can do some nice little fast-forwarding and maybe show you guys more of the actual mission without cutting out huge chunks. Instead I can just kind of fast-forward through them so you guys can still watch it. Anyway, I appreciate you guys tuning in, and here's post-commentary. So here we are in post-commentary. Excuse me. So, I'm really glad that I did post-commentary, because I get to go through and show a lot of the more in the ways of launches, in the ways of all the little orbital mechanics. Like here I'm trying to set myself into, I think it's about a 250 kilometer circular orbit, So I also was able to record this video a lot more peacefully. I wasn't nearly as worried about making sure that I was filling in time, and I did still miss a couple of my own cues as far as like I'm not always remembering to change my MechJeb ascent guidance to ensure that it's going to the right altitude, which we'll get to see a little bit of later. But overall, I think that having post-narration, at least for the time being, while I'm doing some of these more complicated maneuvers and getting really frustrated doing everything, it works out a little bit better. So here we are, we skip forward today. I believe this is now 1:45. We're loading 9 Kerbals into the Caladrius space station slash colony vehicle. This is really a colony vehicle first and a space station second. Well, I guess technically it's a space station first, then a colony vehicle, then a space station, because we are going to use it as a space station. Now, one of the things that I'm hoping I can kind of skirt the rules on just a little bit, mostly because they aren't really defined, is that originally I was going to launch this kind of unmanned, but I need at least a couple of the pilots for a little bit of time. And in the rules, it states that you're allowed any launches that are used solely for the purpose of crewing up a vessel are free. So basically you get like a little single-staged orbit space shuttle, and you can ferry troops up, astronauts up rather, without having to abide by the launcher rules of one launcher every weight times 2 or times 1.5 if it's reusable days. And what I'm hoping is that if I stay in Kerbin's sphere of influence, i.e. go to the moon, fill up, come back, that instead of ferrying troops, I can ferry supplies and basically just launch the colony ship fully supplied. If not, maybe I'll have to ferry all the troops down and ferry them all back up, and then only use just a little bit of supply in there. So here we can see I realized kind of mid-launch that it was trying to circularize my orbit really early, at 50 kilometers in fact, which is not an orbit, that's still within atmosphere. So I get really worried at this point that I'm not going to have enough fuel to get a proper orbit, but everything, I guess I wasn't thinking too clear. I wasn't sure how long I was burning in the atmosphere, kind of wasting fuel trying to circularize. I guess I caught it early enough, but at the time I freaked and wasn't really aware of how I'd been, of the fact that I basically set it to a 50-kilometer orbit when that's not an orbit around Kerbin. That is, though, an orbit around the moon. And so now you see me I'm making an adjustment up to 75. I'm trying to get some time warp. For some reason, my time warp was not wanting to cooperate with me. You can see up in the upper left, I still only have physics warp set, even though MechJeb is able to get a times 10, times 50 warp. So I circularize 75, and then realize that I do still have enough fuel to move into a 125-kilometer orbit, which is wonderful. So now that we are in a 75, we can deploy our wonderful solar panels, maybe turn some lights on, check everything out, take a look against the beautiful backdrop of Kerbin there, as well as a little bit of deep space. I think that this is by and far one of my, as far as being both simple and elegant, it's a nice ship. I like it. And the Caladrius is a nod to two things. One, to the mythological bird that could sit on the end of your bed, and that would signify that you would be healed. I believe of the plague, which, you know, that's great. I'm not sure if it's the plague, or if it's some other earlier plague, or just plagues in general. But the mythical bird was the king's bird and would sit at the end of your bed, and that would say that you're healed. And here I am trying desperately to see if I can get any kind of sort of rendezvous But I can't, and that's okay. It's also a nod to the Caladrius, the first colony ship that I built, not for the Duna challenge, but just for my own enjoyment of building a giant massive colony ship out of multiple parts. Only after I spent some weeks building and planning and launching, my computer could not handle the part count at all, and I was unable to move the ship past past almost finishing assembly without the frame rate just totally choking out on me. So this, I guess you could say, is the Caladrius 2, and I think it's working out. Now, I did notice, I mean, once I do have all of the modules attached to it, my frame rate is going to be pretty slow, but luckily we only have to deal with that for a little bit as we move it to Duna. Hopefully all of the other modules can launch with their intended amounts of fuel. So I'm thinking I should be able to, once I get a capture on all of the little bits and pieces in Kerbin orbit, all of the future modules should be able to launch, if I'm not mistaken, with all of their fuel and required resources. I don't think I have any other empty launches coming up. The command module, the 2 Duna drivers, and their Duna driver supply parachutes. None of them, I know the command module carries fuel, but it's within its weight limit to do so, so I don't have to launch it empty. So I can go fill this, fuel it all up, bring it back, and then everything else should just be able to launch into rendezvous with it. That'll help out a lot. And so once we've done that, then frame rate isn't going to be too much of a bother. I hope. This is the Calamity mission, so things going smoothly is not what it's known for. But we should be okay. We should survive slow frame rate. And because all we really need to do is burn for Duna at that point, and then turn around very slowly, and then burn retrograde. I'm pretty sure, fully fueled, that it should have enough fuel. Again, this is what I said with the moon, to perform a full Duna burn and retro burn, because I will not be aero braking. As you can see, the middle of the Caladrius there is just a bit of steel and space tape and wire, and would not be very fitting for, doing aero braking through even the thinnest of Dunan atmospheres. So here I am, cleaning up, doing some much needed cleanup. Gotta make sure that we don't have too much space junk in Kerbin orbit. I did have a decoupler that sits out there, which is great, as a piece of debris that I don't really have any way of cleaning up within my current launch parameters, but maybe in the future we'll send up some lasers or a bucket or something, scoop that up. And now the fun begins. I'm actually working on bringing in the Kethane miner and one of the 2 engines, the only engine to have fuel and or monopropellant in it. Bring it in for a rendezvous. A wonderful few speedy orbits later. This is one thing that I think MechJeb actually does pretty good on, is if you tell it, well, okay, I will take a step back and say it does way better than it did in the prior version. Was that the prior version of MechJeb, you told it to rendezvous, and it would just kind of arbitrarily pick a spot and say, oh yeah, okay, we'll rendezvous here. And then it would say, oh, and that rendezvous orbital, the perfect time between orbits to get this rendezvous to work is 63 years from now. So I'm just going to wait and time accelerate my way over there. The only thing it doesn't do, so the new one, of course, is obviously not taking 63 years to find the perfect orbit to close in on. But it does, however, not calculate your thrust to weight ratio and your ISP in when to start its retrograde burn, because as you saw, the Caladrius flew straight under and got well within distance, and then the retro burn kind of started to happen. It assumes instantaneous thrust, but that's okay. We'll survive. It still gets really close and does a magnificent job, so I can't really complain because I'm not having to do the rendezvous and plan out my Hoffman intercept orbit and my optimal, orbital inclination. I was never a math whiz kid. I was kind of decent. I was more of a build with Legos kind of kid, which is why this game is so particularly entrancing to me. Because it's Legos with all of the things that I pretended Legos to do now actually done in a physics engine. So here we are. The other thing that I don't really entrust MechJeb to do is not just completely burn through all of my monopropellant spinning around needlessly, which happens a lot in docking. However, you can see I also hit the wrong translation buttons and am not close enough to get that beautiful little magnet to engage. I'm also running dangerously low on monoprop. I want to get just right there. Oh, so badly. So frustrated. 8 monopropellant left. Don't want to destroy my solar panels, because even the slightest deep space nudge will send them shattering away. So, I give up on that. I don't want to take any more chances with my 8 monopropellant left. We line up the Kethane miner. We send it over. Blast away with our monopropellant. Since it has about 6,000-ish units of Kethane, that equates to almost, I think there's almost a 1-to-1 ratio of Kethane to monopropellant, so even if you call it 5,000, it's far more than the 20, 40 that the engine had. Or is it 80? I just totally forgot how much monopropellant is in a spherical tank. I think it's 20 per tank. Yeah. So, this time, we get in close, we lock in, and now we can control the space station largely from the rear, which is kind of irritating, mostly because the camera is centered kind of at the top of the Kethane miner. And even though we have the most off-balanced RCS control on the planet, because the space station has none of its own RCS control, none of its own engines, it is literally just a floating chunk of crew habitation and power. So we're controlling it from the back, kind of wiggling it around and moving in to try and dock doing this the best we can. Again, I trust MechJeb even less this time, even though I probably should have trusted it more, just because it's so off balance, and MechJeb just does not work very well with off-balanced items. So here we are. It looks so wonderful. It looks so well lined up that I have to switch over and totally screw things up for myself. So at this point, I get kind of pissed off and say, okay, I need to line this up better from further out. We're having some troubles doing all this close-up stuff. This was probably completely unnecessary, but it was out of frustration in just docking in general that I just needed to step away. Maybe the computer needed to step away. Maybe it was MechJeb, getting tired of interruptions from Space Command. I know what I'm doing. I don't need to hear from you. I'll do whatever I want kind of thing. The little howl. The howl in every MechJeb. wanting to have its own adventures and be free from having to lug these giant... Right now I've got well over 60 tons of metal and space weight and mass, just mass and Kerbals. And that's a lot of work for one little engine to do. So it just needed to take a breather, just step away from the situation a little bit, take 10 deep breaths through your processor, 10 deep imaginary mech-jeb breaths, and come back. So here we are, having a little bit better job lining up. Trying to get kind of in line first before moving on in, which is fine. We have plenty of Kethane. Now, it does still try to do this kind of want to spin around in circles thing. See it drifting off there, so I have to turn it off, take control, not use the RCS, and instead use the SAS, which I would love if the docking autopilot took into consideration the fact that the SAS is so much stronger now. And there we go. The magnets engage, we have proper docking, and we fill up. And that's going to be it for this episode. We'll see you next time as we use the Caladrius to get somewhere, get some of these pieces picked up.